Hi everybody, I'm Carolyn. I'm the Children's Librarian at Battersea and York Gardens Library, and welcome to Story Explorers. These are posted every Saturday at 3 p.m. and we introduce you to some stories or authors that we think you will enjoy and that are of course all available at Wandsworth Libraries. Exciting news, this Monday, the 7th of September, we're going to be open to browsing. So we're still our limited hours of 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. But during that time, you can still come and pick up a reservation if you have one to collect, or use our computers for 30 minutes if you're a grown-up. But you can also briefly browse our collection rather than having to reserve everything through our catalog. We do, of course, ask that unless you are exempt, you wear a face covering, that you sanitize before and after handling our collections. And if you touch any books but you decide not to take them home, you set them aside so that we can quarantine them properly. But we are excited to have more people back in the library. In the Children's Library here at Battersea, we're going to allow one household at a time to browse the collection. So you might have to queue outside if we have too many people in the library at once, but it should make it a little bit easier for you to get the books that you want. Maybe some of these books I'm talking about today. And today I'm going to talk about some children's books and one teen book about refugees and the refugee crisis. Most of them are fiction because I really believe in the power of learning about things through storytelling, but they do of course have lots of non-fiction information in them. Now, a lot of these books are actually out at the minute, which means they're good, I think. So I have some pictures for you. You have to use your imagination and pretend that I'm holding the book. And at the end, I'm going to read a quick excerpt from one of my favorite books for you. So the first book I want to talk about is a picture book. And I'm going to start by talking about picture books. And this is called The Journey, and it's by Francesca Sanna. And this is a really beautifully illustrated book about the journey that a refugee might take from their original homeland to their new home. And it uses a lot of kind of magic realism, so adding fantastical elements to these real life issues to tell a really heartwarming story that is about the trials and the stresses and the really tough issues of immigration, but in a way that is really accessible to young people. And the illustrations are just gorgeous, so I really recommend The Journey. The next book is called My Name Is Not Refugee, and it's by Kate Milner, and this is a really big award winner for its sensitive handling of the refugee crisis and for portraying the experiences of being a refugee, again, in a way that children can really access and understand. And it doesn't shy away from the tougher issues, but doesn't make it so scary that children can't also engage in the book and ask real questions. And it's very sweetly illustrated by Kate Milner as well, very touching illustrations. The next book I do have here, and it is called Lubna and Pebble, and it is by Wendy Madur and Danielle Agneas. And this is a really sweet story about both the moments of loneliness and friendship and solidarity that occur in a refugee camp. So Lubna has a friend named Pebble, and eventually she meets a human friend, and she uses her empathy and her relationship with Pebble to help that child cope with living in a refugee camp as well. And the illustrations are quite beautiful, but also very simple, and the words are very simple as well, so it's a really great way to introduce this issue to younger children. And the next one is called The Color of Home. Now this is an older book, it's been around for a longer time, and it's by Mary Hoffman. And it is for slightly older readers because, as you can see, there's quite a lot of text. It is a longer story about Hassan, who is a refugee from Somalia, and he's come to the UK and finds it very grey and dull and not as colorful as the home he remembers fondly. But as he learns how to communicate with people, as he is embraced by his community so that he can share his story, he finds this glimmer of color in his new life in the UK. And it touches on both the harder aspects of being a refugee and of the journey he took to be here, and also the joyful moments of finding at last a safe place to be, where you are accepted and embraced. The next one is called The Day the War Came by Nicola Davies and illustrated by Rebecca Cobb. And I just realized that I didn't have that one and I accidentally grabbed the wrong book. This one is called The King of the Sky, and it's also by Nicola Davies and illustrated by Laura Carlin. And it is about a boy and an old man and some pigeons. And it is also about immigration. A little less obviously about refugees specifically, but it is about learning about your new home and how to find your sense of self when a big part of your identity has changed. And The Day the War Came is another beautifully illustrated book that uses the metaphor, the symbol of an empty chair, to talk about how we can make space for refugees and how we can allow all children, especially children refugees, access to the education and safety and acceptance that all children have a right to. So both of these are beautiful books about immigration and refugees. And the next book is called Welcome, and this takes a slightly lighter touch to the issue of immigration, because you could just read this as a fun tale about some animals looking for a new home. It's about polar bears who are on an ice floe that breaks away from a larger iceberg, and they're searching for a safe place to stay before their ice floe melts. And many of the islands they come across are not very welcoming, unfortunately. So you can definitely use this as a jumping off point for discussions about what it means to be a refugee, why people might be refugees, or polar bears in this case, and how we can welcome and accept them. And it also really hints towards an increasing issue of people who are refugees due to changes in climate. So that's an interesting point for discussion as well. And it's really fun illustrations too. It's a really lighthearted way to enter into the discussion. And next is The Suitcase by Chris Naylor Ballesteros. And this is another one that you could just read as a story, but it has a lot of points for discussion in it. It is about a stranger who arrives with a suitcase, and his new community don't respond entirely positively, and they want to find out what's in his suitcase. And when it's revealed, you get this kind of backstory about the stranger without actually going into it. And not to spoil it, but in the end, friendship does win out. And so it's another one about acceptance. The next one is kind of in between a picture book and a graphic novel, but it is for older readers, probably like 12 plus. And it is The Arrival by Sean Tan. And this is a wordless graphic novel, so it's entirely told through pictures. They're very artful, very surreal look at what it is like to be a refugee coming to a strange, confusing, stressful new land, but also about finding friendship and a new sense of community in that environment. And as always, Sean Tan just does amazing illustrations. And then this is another graphic novel, but for younger children, for the middle grade set, which would be about ages 8 to 12, give or take, and it's called Azzy in Between, and it is about Azzy, who is a refugee due to her home country being at war, and it follows her and her family through a perilous boat journey through settling into a new land and the difficulties in embracing your new home and learning about it. It also covers homesickness, saying goodbye to loved ones, but those joyful moments of new friends and new experiences and a sense of safety and security in their new home as well. And that's by Sarah Garland. I can't remember if I said that. Next, I'm going to talk about some chapter books for middle grade, which is about, as I said, ages 8 to 12. The first one is The Boy at the Back of the Class by Anjali Rauf. And if you watch my books by Muslim authors for children and teens, this one also came up, but I thought it was worth mentioning again because it is a really sensitive and heartfelt story about a group of classmates who want to make sure that their new classmate, who is a refugee from Syria, feels very welcome. So of course the new kid, the boy at the back of the class, does experience some hardship, but it is nice that this one sort of starts with a foundation of people who are already approaching it with empathy, even though they do have a lot to learn about their new classmate. It is a sweet story, I think, for fans of wonder. And the last chapter book I'm going to talk about is Running on the Roof of the World by Jessie Butterworth. And this is about two children on a survivalist adventure traveling from Chinese-controlled Tibet to India, and they're looking for the Dalai Lama. It's got lots of adventure. They have so many challenges to overcome, like it's wintertime, so the weather is crazy in the mountains. And they have a secret coded message to break, and there's even snipers. So it's fun and adventurous, but also touches on some really serious issues that refugee children, especially ones traversing the wild on their own, would face. And it's actually inspired by stories, real stories, of the author's grandmother's life, who immigrated who arrived in India at age 10 from Tibet and gardened with the Dalai Lama, apparently. So that's another one about an area I don't know much about, to be honest. And I just did want to talk about one nonfiction book, and it is called Who Are Refugees and Migrants? What Makes People Leave Their Homes and Other Big Questions by Michael Rosen and Anne-Marie Young. And it is basically what it says on the tin. It investigates these big questions and tackles some assumptions that a lot of young people might have about refugees and immigrants in a straightforward and well-researched way. There's stories from refugees about their real-life experience, and there's also some thought-provoking questions throughout that are great conversation starters in a classroom or at home. And the last book I want to focus on is a teen book, and it is called The Bone Sparrow by Xana Freylon. No. And it is a beautifully told story of friendship through the fence of an immigration detention center. And it is about reading and storytelling, and there's a lot of magic realism and imagination in it. There's a talking rubber duck. There's just a lot of fantasy elements in this really harsh real life scenario that is a nice way of balancing the kind of tragedy of the whole story without taking away from the seriousness of it. And it is endorsed by Amnesty International UK for being a good introduction for teens into the issues of immigration detention centers and refugees. And I just wanted to read a quick excerpt from it that I think really captures the feeling of the story. There's going to be characters and things happening that you're not sure about, but maybe that will whet your appetite enough to come get the book. And as I said, it is a teen book, so it is for older readers, about 13 to 16, I think, is the target age group, but I really enjoyed it as an adult, and I think older teens and adults would like it too. So this is from The Bone Sparrow by Xana Freylon, and it is published by Hachette Books. This is a tale from long, long ago. Anka was born from an egg. I stop reading and look at Jimmy. This is just the kind of story that would drive Queenie wild. She'd scream and rage about how stupid it was, and that no one could be born from an egg. And why would you waste your headspace with stuff like that? But Jimmy is staring at me with a kind of hungry in her eyes, one fist clenched tight around the bone sparrow, and her other hand still twirling her feather. Jimmy isn't anything like Queenie. Anka was my great-great-great-grandmother, she says. Hurry up, will you? Stories don't work if you stop all the time. Don't you know about reading? Maybe she is like Queenie, just a bit. No one knew where she had come from, but there she was, cradled by a nest, halfway down the old well, with fragments of broken shells sticking to her hair and skin. Some people thought she had been dropped by a passing traveler, happy to be rid of a child covered in hair that looked more like feathers than the soft hair of a newborn babe. "Leave it down there," spat Guntis. He was the oldest man in the town, although certainly not the wisest. But in a town where age was often respected above wisdom, his word was often obeyed. His nose was red and blistered from too many summers under the hot sun, and he walked with a stick used often to prod others into action. "Who are we to mess with the gods? Pah!" He shook his head as he peered down at the mewling child stuck in the well and scowled. "What nonsense you talk, old man," said Mirka. "This is clearly the work of a person, not a god. Now stop your talking and someone get that child out of there so we can all go home." Guntis may have been the oldest man in town, but Mirka was the oldest woman. Her nose wasn't quite as red as Guntis's, despite having spent more summers in the sun than her brother. And she was certainly considered wise. She was also the only one who could override her brother's decision. The townspeople jumped into action. The only one small and thin enough to fit down the well was Otto, a 6-year-old boy. Slowly, Otto was lowered by rope into the well, where he picked up the baby and held her tightly to his chest. An undeniable surge of love for the girl filled Otto's chest. Before he had even been pulled back from the darkness of the well, he had vowed to protect this child, no matter what she might face. As Otto and the baby came into the light, Otto raised his chin in determination. "Her name is Anka," he said, and his eyes flashed, daring anyone to argue. Guntis and Mirka looked at each other. There was no question in either of their minds as to the fate of the two children, destined to follow a path strewn with hardships. Guntis looked down at Anka, cradled in the arms of the small boy. Pfft! He spat a wet gob of chewed tobacco on the ground by Otto's feet. "She's as blind as a bat, that one. She'll never see a thing." And he shook his head again and walked away. It was only Mirka, who knew her brother too well, who saw him cast a final look back at the children, with a mixture of hope and sadness etched across his face. Mirka picked a piece of shell from the baby's hair. "He's right," she said. "The girl is blind. But Otto," she lowered her voice so that only the boy could hear, "this girl is destined to see more than most." And with that, she followed her brother out of the town square. I turn the page, but the story stops. How can someone do that? Stop a story just like that? The next page is a list written in blue pen of the top 10 places to visit before you die. I wonder how many Jimmy's mum had visited. Jimmy looks at the bone sparrow in her hands. Her cheeks are glinting wet. "Should I keep reading?" I ask, fingering the pages to try and find more of the story while all the words wash through my head. I can see the baby down the well and the feathers all over it, and the little boy Otto cradling that babe in his arms. But Jimmy shakes her head. "I want to save the stories. Make them last long, you know." I nod, and she stands up and says, "All right then." She takes the book and the torch from me and hands me her feather instead. "Thanks, Subi." And then she leaves, disappearing into the dark and the dirt, and the moon disappears with her. Watching her go, something in my chest explodes. Now there's a tightness in there that I can't shake, no matter how many breaths I suck in, and an exciting rush in my legs, tingling through to my toes. I wonder when Jimmy will come back. From my pocket, I hear the Shakespeare duck. "And the duck was the most magnificent duck the world had ever seen." The end of my reading. It's not the end of the book, of course. It's right about in the middle. And I hope that gave you a good taste of the style of writing and the essence of the story without giving too much away. So if you would like that book or any of the other books I talked about today, I will leave a link of a list of these books in our catalog. You can reserve them and we'll let you know when they're ready to collect. Or you can come in and browse the library starting Monday the 7th of September. Remember to wear your face masks and follow the COVID safe specifications for using the library. But we are looking forward to welcoming you back. And we will still have our online events running, so that's online rhyme times every weekday at 10 a.m. My session is on Friday, but you can catch other children's librarians every other day. And it's September, but you can still finish the summer reading challenge. So if you read any of these books or another book, or 6 other books even, you can register them at summerreadingchallenge.org.uk to collect digital prizes. Let me know what you're reading. What's your favorite book, either about the refugee crisis or whatever you like to read about. And stay tuned for much more online from Wandsworth Libraries. Have an excellent weekend. Bye-bye.